The first time she noticed him, it was the way he held the lunch tray, not with the casual indifference of the other kids who grabbed their food and moved on, but with both hands, fingers wrapped around the edges like it might disappear if he let go. He was small for 13, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a jacket 2 sizes too big that he wore even indoors. The cafeteria was loud that September afternoon, filled with the chaos of 300 students trying to eat in 30 minutes. But she saw him standing at the end of the line, waiting. Always waiting, never pushing forward, never speaking up when someone cut in front of him, just waiting. Maria Santos had worked in the Lincoln Middle School cafeteria for 11 years. She knew the rhythm of hungry kids, the ones who complained about everything, the ones who asked for seconds, the ones who threw away full trays of food without a thought. But this boy was different. When he finally reached her station, he looked at the mashed potatoes and chicken like it was the first meal he'd seen in days. She spooned a normal portion onto his plate, and he whispered thank you so quietly she almost didn't hear it. His eyes met hers for just a second before he looked down again, and in that brief moment she saw something that made her chest tighten. Fear not of her but of something else, something bigger. She watched him walk to the corner table near the emergency exit, the one nobody wanted because it was too close to the kitchen noise and too far from the windows. He sat alone, back against the wall, and ate slowly, methodically, like he was trying to make it last. When the bell rang and students rushed out, leaving behind half-eaten food and crumpled napkins, he stayed until the very last moment, scraping his plate completely clean before finally standing up. The next day she looked for him again. He came through the line the same way, quiet and patient, and when she served him she added an extra scoop of rice. He noticed. His eyes widened slightly, and he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with confusion, like he wasn't used to anyone noticing him at all. Over the following weeks, she started paying closer attention. He came every single day, always last in line, always alone. His clothes were clean but worn. His shoes had duct tape holding the sole together, and he never had money for the vending machines or snacks that other kids bought between classes. The lunch he got at school seemed to be the only food he was certain of. October brought rain to the city, cold and relentless. The cafeteria windows fogged up from the steam of cooking pots and the breath of hundreds of students. Maria started adding small things to his tray, an extra bread roll tucked beside his plate, an apple wrapped in a napkin, a carton of milk when he only took water. She did it quietly, without drawing attention, and he never said anything beyond that whispered thank you. But she noticed he ate everything. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left behind. She learned his name from the attendance sheet that Ms. Harper, the vice principal, kept at the serving window. Daniel Reeves, 8th grade. No behavioral issues, no tardiness, no problems, invisible, essentially. The kind of student who slipped through the cracks because he never caused trouble, never asked for help. Maria wondered about his family. Where were his parents? Why did he look so hungry? Why was he always alone? But she didn't ask. Some questions felt too invasive, too dangerous. Instead, she showed up every day at 5 in the morning to prep the food, and she made sure there was always enough on his plate. November came with the first frost. Daniel showed up in the same jacket, shivering slightly as he stood in line. Maria noticed his hands were red from the cold, and when she served him that day, she added an extra portion of hot soup to his tray. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw tears forming in the corners of his eyes. He blinked them away quickly and moved on, but something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding. She knew he was struggling, and he knew she saw him not just as another student passing through the line, but as a person who needed help. The weeks blurred together into a routine. Daniel came through the line, Maria served him extra, and he ate everything before leaving. But she started noticing other things too. The bruise on his cheek that he tried to hide with his hair. The way he flinched when doors slammed. The fact that he never talked to anyone, not even the teachers. He moved through the school like a ghost, there but not really present. And Maria's heart broke a little more each day. One afternoon in late November, she was restocking supplies in the back when she overheard 2 teachers talking in the hallway. They were discussing a student whose father had been arrested for substance issues, whose mother had left years ago, who was now living with an elderly grandmother who could barely afford to keep the lights on. They didn't say his name, but Maria knew. She just knew. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that small boy with the too big jacket, sitting alone at the corner table, eating like it was the only good thing in his day. The next morning she arrived earlier than usual. She made extra pancakes, the kind with chocolate chips that the kids loved. And when Daniel came through the line, she stacked 3 on his plate, along with extra sausages and fruit. He stared at the food, then at her, and for the first time, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. She smiled back and said something she'd been wanting to say for weeks. "You're okay, Daniel. You're going to be okay." He nodded, his eyes glistening, and walked to his table. December brought the holiday season, which meant budget cuts and new policies. The school district, struggling financially, implemented stricter portion control guidelines. Each student was to receive exactly 1 serving of each item, no more. Waste had to be reduced, they said. Costs had to be controlled. Mrs. Klein, the new cafeteria supervisor, took her job seriously. She stood at the serving line with a clipboard, watching every scoop, every portion, making sure no one got extra. Maria felt her hands shake as she served Daniel his lunch that first day under the new rules. 1 scoop of pasta, 1 piece of bread, 1 carton of milk, nothing extra. He looked at the plate, then at her, and she saw the disappointment in his eyes. She wanted to tell him it wasn't her choice, that she was being watched, but Mrs. Klein was right there, counting portions and checking off boxes. Daniel ate his meal in silence that day, and when he left, Maria noticed he lingered near the trash cans, glancing at the food other students had thrown away. It made her sick. Here was a boy who needed every calorie, every bit of nutrition, and she was being forced to ration his food while others wasted theirs. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She thought about her own children, grown now with families of their own, and how she'd always made sure they never went to bed hungry. She thought about the values her mother had taught her back in Brazil, about caring for those who had less, about doing what's right even when it's hard. The next morning, she made a decision. She would find a way to help Daniel, supervisor or no supervisor. She started packing extra food in paper bags, a sandwich, some fruit, cookies she baked at home. She'd wait until Mrs. Klein was busy checking inventory or handling paperwork, and then she'd slip the bag to Daniel with his tray. He'd tuck it into his backpack quickly, looking around nervously, and mouth the words "thank you." It became their secret, a small rebellion against rules that felt cruel. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. One afternoon in January, Mrs. Klein caught her. Maria was handing Daniel a bag with leftover meatloaf and vegetables when the supervisor walked around the corner. She saw everything: the bag, the boy's guilty expression, Maria's defiant stance. Mrs. Klein's face turned red with anger. She called Maria into the office after lunch service, and the conversation was harsh. "You're violating district policy. You're showing favoritism. You're teaching this boy to expect handouts. I could fire you for this." Maria listened, her heart pounding, and then she spoke quietly but firmly. "That boy is hungry. He needs this food. If following the rules means letting a child go hungry, then I'm okay with breaking them." Mrs. Klein stared at her, clearly not expecting resistance. She threatened to write Maria up, to report her to the district, to make sure she lost her job, but Maria didn't back down. "Do what you need to do," she said. "I'm going to keep helping him." The supervisor stormed out, and Maria sat in the small office, shaking. She was 56 years old, with bills to pay and a mortgage to cover. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but she also couldn't live with herself if she stopped helping Daniel. The next few weeks were tense. Mrs. Klein watched Maria like a hawk, checking every tray, every portion, making notes on her clipboard. But Maria was careful. She started arriving even earlier, preparing separate meals that she'd keep in her own lunch bag. She'd catch Daniel before school started, in the hallway near the gym, and hand him food wrapped in foil. He'd take it gratefully, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite name: hope, maybe, or relief. February was brutal. The cold settled into the city like it meant to stay forever, and the school's heating system struggled to keep up. Daniel showed up in the same thin jacket, his lips tinged blue, his whole body trembling. Maria couldn't take it anymore. She brought in one of her son's old winter coats, a heavy navy blue thing with a hood and deep pockets. She found Daniel before school and handed it to him. He looked at the coat, then at her, and shook his head. "I can't," he whispered. "It's too much." But Maria insisted. "Take it, please. You need it more than my son does. He lives in Florida now. It's just taking up space in my closet." Daniel held the coat like it was made of gold, and when he put it on, it fit perfectly. "Thank you, Mrs. Santos. I don't know how to." She cut him off gently. "You don't have to say anything. Just stay warm." As winter turned to spring, their bond deepened. Daniel started arriving at the cafeteria early, not just for food, but to help Maria prep. He'd wash vegetables, wipe down tables, stack trays. He didn't talk much, but he was present in a way that mattered. She learned things about him through careful questions and patient listening. His grandmother tried her best but was on a fixed income. His father was in prison. His mother hadn't been in contact for 4 years. He spent most nights doing homework by candlelight because the electricity got shut off sometimes. He never complained, never asked for pity. He just kept showing up, day after day, doing his best to survive. Maria started teaching him things: how to cook simple meals with cheap ingredients, how to stretch $1 at the grocery store, how to keep going even when everything felt impossible. She told him stories about her own childhood in Sao Paulo, about being poor and hungry, about working hard to build a better life. She told him that circumstances don't define you, that you get to choose who you become. He listened to every word like she was giving him a map to a place he desperately wanted to reach. April brought a crisis. Mrs. Klein found out about the coat. Another teacher had mentioned seeing Maria give Daniel expensive-looking winter gear, and the supervisor confronted her in front of other cafeteria workers. "You're overstepping boundaries. You're not his parent or his guardian. This is inappropriate." Maria felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Miss Harper, the vice principal who'd been standing nearby, intervened. She told Mrs. Klein that Maria was showing compassion and that the school should be grateful to have staff who care about students. The supervisor backed down, but the damage was done. Maria knew she was on thin ice. That afternoon, Daniel found her in the kitchen after school. He looked upset, his usual calm exterior cracking. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Santos. I don't want you to lose your job because of me. Maybe I should stop." She stopped him immediately. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. You deserve help. You deserve to eat and to be warm and to have someone who cares about you. Don't ever apologize for that." He broke down then, really broke down, crying like he'd been holding it in for years. She hugged him, this boy who wasn't her son but felt like one anyway, and let him cry until he had nothing left. The final months of 8th grade passed quickly. Daniel grew taller, stronger, less like the fragile boy who'd first caught her attention. He started speaking up more in class, participating in ways he never had before. His grades improved. Teachers noticed. Ms. Harper noticed. And through it all, Maria was there, every morning in the cafeteria, making sure he had enough to eat and someone to talk to. She became his constant, his safe place, the person who believed in him when no one else did. May brought graduation preparations. Daniel was moving on to high school, and Maria felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. She'd miss seeing him every day, miss their quiet conversations and his shy smiles. But she knew he was going to be okay. He'd proven to himself that he could survive, that he could thrive even in impossible circumstances. On the last day of school, he brought her a drawing he'd made in art class. It was a picture of the cafeteria with her standing behind the serving line, and written at the bottom were the words, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Summer came and went. Maria thought about Daniel often, wondering how he was doing in high school, hoping he'd found support there too. She sent prayers out into the universe for this boy who'd touched her heart so deeply. September arrived, and a new school year began. New students, new faces, new kids who needed help. Maria kept doing what she'd always done, serving food with care and watching for the ones who needed a little extra attention. Years passed. Maria continued working at Lincoln Middle School, aging gracefully into her 60s. Mrs. Klein eventually retired, replaced by a kinder supervisor who appreciated Maria's dedication. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. She became something of a legend among students and staff, the cafeteria lady who genuinely cared, who remembered names and birthdays, who always had a kind word and sometimes a little extra food for those who needed it. Then, one morning in June, she received an unexpected phone call. It was from Lincoln High School's main office. They were organizing a graduation ceremony and needed to verify some information. A student had requested her presence as a special guest. When they told her the student's name, Maria felt her heart stop. Daniel Reeves. She hadn't seen him in 4 years, hadn't known if he remembered her or if those middle school days had faded into the background of his life. But apparently he hadn't forgotten. The graduation ceremony was held on a warm Saturday afternoon in the high school's auditorium. Maria arrived early, nervous and uncertain about what to expect. The space was massive, filled with rows of seats and decorated with blue and gold balloons. Parents and family members filed in, dressed in their best clothes, carrying flowers and cameras. Maria felt out of place in her simple dress and cardigan, clutching a small purse and looking for somewhere to sit. An usher directed her to a reserved section near the front, and she sat down, her hands trembling slightly. The ceremony began with speeches from the principal and valedictorian. Maria tried to focus, but her mind kept wandering. Where was Daniel? What did he want to say to her? Why had he invited her here? Then came the moment for student recognitions, where graduates could thank people who'd made a difference in their lives. Maria watched as several students took the microphone, thanking parents and teachers and coaches, and then they called Daniel Reeves to the stage. He walked up confidently, wearing his cap and gown, looking so different from the small, scared boy she'd known. He was tall now, broad-shouldered, with a calm presence that commanded attention. He carried a piece of paper, but when he reached the microphone, he folded it and set it aside. He cleared his throat, and his voice carried through the auditorium clear and strong. "I want to start by thanking someone who probably doesn't expect to be thanked today. Her name is Maria Santos, and she works in the cafeteria at Lincoln Middle School. She's sitting right there in the 3rd row." Daniel pointed, and hundreds of eyes turned to look at Maria. She felt heat rush to her face, tears already forming. He continued, "When I was in 8th grade, I was hungry all the time. Not just hungry for food, but hungry for someone to notice me, to care if I existed. My home life was difficult. I won't go into details, but let's just say I didn't have much. Mrs. Santos saw me when I was invisible. She fed me when I was starving. She gave me a coat when I was freezing. She told me I was going to be okay when I didn't believe it myself." The auditorium was completely silent. Parents leaned forward. Students stopped fidgeting. Even the faculty on stage seemed transfixed. Daniel's voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. "There were days when the only reason I came to school was because I knew she'd be there. She wasn't my teacher or my counselor or my parent, but she was the person who saved my life. Every extra scoop of food, every apple she snuck into my bag, every kind word she whispered, all of it mattered. All of it kept me going. And when I thought I couldn't do it anymore, when I wanted to give up, she reminded me that I was worth fighting for. Maria was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. Other people in the audience were crying too, moved by his words. Daniel smiled, looking directly at her. Today I'm graduating with honors. I got a full scholarship to State University. I'm going to study social work because I want to help kids like me, kids who need someone to see them. And none of this would have happened without Maria Santos. So before I thank my teachers or my guidance counselor or anyone else, I want to thank her first because she's the reason I'm standing here. The auditorium erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and wiping their eyes. Daniel stepped away from the microphone and walked down from the stage, moving through the crowd until he reached Maria's row. She stood, her legs shaky, and he pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "Thank you for everything." She held him, this young man who'd once been a lost boy, and whispered back, "I'm so proud of you, so incredibly proud." After the ceremony, people approached Maria. Parents thanked her for being the kind of person who helps children. Teachers told her they wished they'd noticed Daniel sooner. The principal asked if she'd be willing to speak at future events about the importance of caring for vulnerable students. Maria was overwhelmed by all of it, but the only thing that mattered was Daniel. They talked for over an hour, sitting on a bench outside the auditorium. He told her about high school, about the social worker who'd helped him get emergency assistance, about moving into a better living situation with a foster family who treated him well. He told her about his plans for college and his dreams for the future, and he told her something else, something he'd never said before. "There were nights in 8th grade when I thought about ending it all. I didn't see a way forward, but then I'd remember that the next day I'd see you in the cafeteria and you'd smile at me like I mattered. Those small moments kept me alive. You kept me alive." Maria held his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Daniel continued, "I know you probably helped lots of kids over the years, and maybe I was just one of many. But to me, you were everything. You were the proof that good people exist, that someone cared if I lived or died." They sat together as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the school grounds. Maria thought about all the years she'd worked in that cafeteria, all the thousands of students she'd served. She'd never thought of herself as doing anything special, just trying to be decent and kind in small ways. But hearing Daniel's words, seeing what he'd become, she understood that small acts of kindness aren't small at all. They ripple outward in ways we can't always see, touching lives and changing futures. As they said goodbye that evening, Daniel gave her one more hug. "I'm going to keep in touch," he promised. "I'm not disappearing. You're stuck with me now." Maria laughed through her tears. "Good. I wouldn't want it any other way." She watched him walk back to his foster family, watched them embrace him with genuine affection and pride. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that he was going to be okay. Better than okay. He was going to do amazing things. The story of Daniel's graduation speech spread through the community. A local newspaper ran an article about the cafeteria worker who'd changed a student's life. Maria was embarrassed by the attention but grateful for the conversations it started about food insecurity and the importance of noticing struggling students. She continued working at Lincoln Middle School. Now more aware than ever of the impact she could have, she looked for the quiet ones, the hungry ones, the invisible ones, and she made sure they knew someone saw them. Daniel went off to college that fall. He called Maria regularly, updating her on his classes and his life. He came home during breaks and always visited her at the school, sometimes bringing other college students who wanted to volunteer in the cafeteria or start programs to help food-insecure kids. He became exactly what he'd promised, a social worker dedicated to helping vulnerable children, and he credited Maria every single time someone asked him why he chose that path. Years later, when Maria finally retired at 68, the school held a ceremony in her honor. Daniel flew in from across the state, where he was running a non-profit focused on child welfare. He spoke at her retirement party, telling the story once again of how a simple act of kindness had saved his life. He presented her with an award his organization had created in her name, given annually to people who make extraordinary differences in children's lives through everyday compassion. Maria stood in front of the crowd, looking at the faces of students and staff and community members who'd come to celebrate her career. She thought about all the moments that had led to this point, seeing a hungry boy in line, deciding to give him extra food, standing up to supervisors who didn't understand, showing up every day even when it was hard. She thought about how easily she could have looked away, could have followed the rules, could have convinced herself that it wasn't her responsibility. But she hadn't. She'd chosen to see and to care and to act. In her brief speech, Maria said something that became her legacy. We all have the power to change someone's life. It doesn't take grand gestures or huge sacrifices. Sometimes it just takes an extra scoop of food, a warm coat, a few kind words. Sometimes it just takes seeing someone when they feel invisible. That's all I did. I saw Daniel, and I cared about him. That's all any of us need to do, see each other and care. If we all did that, imagine what kind of world we'd create. The room erupted in applause, and Daniel stood, tears running down his face, clapping harder than anyone. Maria looked at him and smiled, remembering that scared 13-year-old boy and marveling at the man he'd become. This, she thought, is why I did this job for so many years. This is what matters, not the recognition or the awards, but knowing that love and compassion can change everything. The story doesn't end there, though. It continues in the work Daniel does every day, helping hundreds of children who remind him of himself. It continues in the cafeteria workers and teachers and community members who heard this story and decided to pay closer attention to the struggling students in their own schools. It continues in every person who chooses kindness over indifference, who chooses to see rather than to look away. And it reminds us that we all have the capacity to be someone's Maria Santos. We all encounter people who need help, who are hungry or cold or lonely or invisible. The question is whether we'll notice them, whether we'll care enough to act. The answer to that question can literally save a life. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of simple kindness, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this to inspire compassion and to remind us all that we can make a difference. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss future stories that might change how you see the world. And more importantly, take this story with you. Look for the invisible people in your own life. See them, care about them. Be their Maria Santos. Because you never know whose life you might save with one small act of kindness. This story is a fictional narrative inspired by real-life events and the countless unsung heroes who help vulnerable children every day.